Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, March 31st, 2020, last day of March. It's been a long year, hasn't it, March? Yes, I know. Everybody's making the same joke, but I don't see how you can avoid it. It's been a long time, and it's been crazy roller coaster up and down. Yeah. We're on it for another day. Of course, Daily Co's Radio is live now. We are happily reminded by Bill in Portland, Maine, that, it says here that the task has fallen on a shaken, solemn Kagro X and me. David Waldman. That was my best solemnity moment there for you. To update the nation on the most shocking news that not even the CDC or Dr. Fauci could have foreseen. Sure, why not? Pete Buttigieg has grown whiskers, and some people thought it might not even be possible yet for another couple of years for Pete, but he's older than you think. We're all older than we thought now, at this point. Yeah, pointing out something I've seen repeated numerous times on Twitter. We're still in March. This is the same month. There used to be a number of other candidates in the Democratic race. There were debates going on, and, although things were shaping up pretty clearly about who would remain in and who would not. March, same month that we're now in our, how many days have we been doing the social distancing thing here? I guess our kids' schools closed probably somewhere around, the 11th or something like that? So, I guess 20 days since schools closed. Somewhat less, I guess, about 18 days since the disastrous March, Friday the 13th press conference, and those things have been continuing on and getting worse and worse each day. But at any rate, all of this in the same month that, in the month of March, Pete Buttigieg was still a candidate for President of the United States. Amy Klobuchar is still in the race. Of course, they all dropped out in the first couple of days of March. So we're looking at the extremes, the bookends here. But that seems like a million years ago. But here we are. Let's see. So many stories we could be getting to today. I'm not sure which ones we'll hit, which ones we won't. And then who knows what direction we go. If Joan McCarter can join us in the second half of the show. But let's see. I guess we could start with, I said those press conferences kept continuing daily. I don't know if he still thinks necessarily that things are going better for anyone else or for him. I assume he thinks he's doing great. And I guess his measure of the economy is he watches the stock market, which has crept up bit by bit, regaining some of its losses. And, the stock market is weird that way. So I don't know. They don't seem to really be grounded in reality. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe not. In this situation, it might be something that some portion of the country can look to and say, well, at least this is happening. Whether or not we're actually benefiting from it, I don't know. But the numbers are on the way up. So we'll keep a close eye on that just because, I don't know, we've been keeping a close eye on it all this time. And I don't know. We're getting used to it now. Yesterday's press conference, I am sure he thought went beautifully too. That one I saw probably the least of. What did catch my eye was his usual angry exchange with reporters that he doesn't like. This time the question, I guess, was put to him about testing and revealed all sorts of things. The question as put to him, and was it Yamiche? Is that her pronunciation of her first name, Alcindor? I think I have the name right. I got to get to learn this reporter's name because this reporter is shaking it up every day that she's there. But asking the question about why our testing has lagged. The president likes to latch on to the talking point that the United States has done more testing than anybody else. And I don't know whether that's true. I think I've seen numbers that might actually suggest that that's possible. But because Donald Trump said it, you always got to take it with a grain of salt. Maybe it's not the case. The bone of contention appears to be between those who say, in raw numbers, we've done more testing, and those who say, yes, but per capita, which is the more important measure at this point, since the virus is everywhere in the country, the per capita measurement is perhaps the more important. And Trump goes on to explain, well, first of all, he interrupts her, of course, and interrupts to jump in on 2 points. One, I think, to demonstrate that he understood the difference between raw numbers and per capita testing, and I don't think he did that very well. I think he may have blown that one. He might actually, in his head, understand the concept of per capita. It's not an uncommon term. But he went on to explain that part of the reason that, say, South Korea had done more testing per capita was, now the real answer is, of course, because they have a lower population and conducting the same or fewer tests, fewer numbers of tests than we did, would still put them ahead of us per capita because they have fewer people. But instead, he went on to explain that the big difference was, one, that South Korea's population was fairly concentrated in a smallish, relatively speaking, smallish metropolitan area. But this is me cleaning up what his statements actually were, trying to make sense out of it. What he was trying to get at was, well, the concept of per capita. They have fewer people, and it may be easier to test more of them because they're all very much concentrated in the greater Seoul metropolitan area, whereas our population, which is much larger, is much more dispersed across larger expanses of territory. We're a larger country by land area. But, he spun off from there to say, well, we have these vast areas of farmland. But farmland isn't what makes the difference between our testing per capita and their testing per capita. And we certainly have major metropolitan concentrations of sick people, for one thing, and major metropolitan concentrations of people in general. We could absolutely match their raw numbers and their, but not, it wouldn't take us to a per capita point. I mean, in other words, we have large concentrations of population too, and we haven't tested them. So it's really not a question of, per capita, we'll never catch up. Even in raw testing numbers that make a dent in the size of our population still will require vastly more testing in vastly more places. More to the point in terms of highlighting the president's idiocy, because that's what I'm going to do here, is that, one, he insists back to her with respect to South Korea. One of the more amazing statements he makes statements like this all the time, but one of the more amazing statements of the day. I know South Korea better than anybody, he's insisting to her. So there you go. I know South Korea better than anybody. And then immediately goes on to challenge her, by the way, in her knowledge of South Korea, and asks, do you know how many people live in Seoul, Korea? And the audio is difficult to hear. It actually sounds like she might be attempting to provide an answer. But he does it for us all. I know South Korea better than anybody. Seoul has 38 million people in it. And so therefore, that's basically it. That's why Seoul has been able to conduct so many tests and so many tests per capita. That, their population is largely concentrated in the Seoul area. Now, here's the problem, of course, that ordinarily you'd say, well, that would be a knowable thing to the person who knows the most in the whole world about South Korea. And that thing is that the population of Seoul is about 9.7 million people, not 38 million. Now, you might say, well, does it really make sense, given the concentration of the population, to discuss the population of Seoul in terms of within the city limits, the political boundaries of the city of Seoul, Korea? And maybe not. The answer is no. So if you include the outlying suburbs, the greater Seoul metropolitan area, as we might term it here in the United States, There's a measure for that, and it's about 25.6 million people. Still a damn sight less than 38 million people. I mean, it's not awful, not the way 9.7 is when you're saying it's 38 million. But what, 25.6? So add another 10 to, so 12 to 13 million people you're off by. And who cares, right? Maybe they'll all die from coronavirus, and that's okay with Trump because, numbers are just numbers. It's a matter of zeros. As you know, we're now hailing 200,000 deaths as a great success if we get to that, or if we can hold it down to that. They've done a good job. Well, anyway, so here you go. Mr. I know South Korea better than anybody, way off on the population of Seoul, obviously. But then he bases his entire answer on it from there, right? That basically, I know South Korea better than anybody. You can't compare the two. And the reason is I know this other one so well, the comparison doesn't make any sense. And that seems, I don't know, like off the mark, let's say. Now, that all by itself was horrible just because he's standing there with that kind of arrogance and saying he knows South Korea better than anybody and you shut up, and gets all the facts wrong. But then I saw people doing some interesting digging. Like, where did he get that number? People wondered, 38 million is an oddly specific error to make. Now, there are two competing theories about where he got the number 38 million. There are some measures by which you can express the population of the greater metropolitan area of Tokyo, Japan, at about 38 million. And so the one theory is I can't tell the difference between, and I can't remember the difference between China, see, there you go, I've just made the mistake, it's not China, between Japan and Korea, which, as I understand things, just culturally speaking, would be a real groaner, let's say, in certain sections of Asia among the population there. Nobody likes to be confused with their neighbors, obviously. But Korea and Japan have something of a tense history, or had at least something of a tense history during the 20th century. Things may be improving here in the 21st century. Who knows? We could ask. There's 38 million people we could ask in Tokyo. But the other explanation for his pulling the 38 million figure out there was, I guess, I don't know whether people knew this when they went looking or whether they checked it out. Well, he says the population is 38 million. Is it? And they went and Googled it. Is that what happened? I don't really know what drove this. But they went and discovered that when they did Google Seoul, South Korea, they found, how the results come up, and they'll often take the Wikipedia result and pop it up there up on top of your search results. And they'll put it in a little sort of a text box, the basic facts about Seoul, South Korea. And I think what you find is that the elevation of Seoul, South Korea is displayed. Those would be the vital statistics of a city if you're, looking it up on Google or something like that. And so tell me about Seoul, South Korea. The population would be in there too. But right up top is the elevation, which people pointed out by circling it or putting it in a red box. The elevation of Seoul, Korea is 38 meters, which of course would be written 38 with a little M after it. And now the speculation is that Donald Trump saw that very quickly, or maybe somebody who was informing him saw that very quickly, because I don't know if he Googles, and I don't know if he prepares for any of these press conferences, but this sort of seemed like a pat answer, like he had maybe rehearsed a little bit, thinking he would be challenged on this. And maybe somebody saw it and they made the mistake, but somebody somewhere along the line may have read 38 meters as and not elevation 38 meters becomes population 38 million. because there's no explanation in Korea that gets you to a 38 million count for Seoul. And I thought there's some possibility that he may actually have had a inkling in his head of how many millions of people, or the idea that millions and millions, tens of millions of people live in the greater Seoul metropolitan area, because that might have been impressed on him during the North Korean missile crises, I guess, that occupied some of his time early in his term before he became great friends with North Korea's dictator and exchanged beautiful, beautiful letters with him. He may have been briefed at some point that, for instance, provoking North Korea into a confrontation in which they opted to use nuclear weapons against the South Koreans, that the people of Seoul were more or less sitting ducks for a nuclear attack from the north that didn't even have to involve ballistic missiles. They could simply lob shells, although Seoul is not far from the border. And they may have told him that, they may have informed that 20, 25 million, or perhaps that even without missiles and using simply artillery, that some 38 million citizens of South Korea were at risk from attack in the first instant from North Korea. That would, of course, include lots of people outside of the Seoul greater metropolitan area, but still close to the border. That might explain it. Someone may have handed him the 38 million population figure at some point in terms of expected casualties or vulnerable population, and that stuck in his head. But so far, the most attractive explanation, quite honestly, because it's the most ridiculous, is the idea that he mistook the elevation for the population. But you might have to give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. I don't know. All right, let's see. Other stories that I've noted in the last couple of hours to overnight. There's all sorts of, coronavirus takes you anywhere, right? Plenty of interesting items that require our attention. For instance, the news of the Florida pastor of a megachurch, and this was covered in Daily Coast yesterday afternoon too. I should be looking for their coverage of it, but I have easily at hand the New York Times coverage. I'm sure that's where the initial report was what brought it to our attention at Daily Coast. But Florida arrests a pastor of a megachurch after defying virus orders. According to the New York Times reporting, the sheriff of Hillsborough County said the Reverend Rodney Howard Brown, a Pentecostal pastor, endangered the lives of his parishioners by holding services on Sunday, which he did, but it's not usually the way the state, especially the state of Florida, responds to such things. Patricia Mazzi is the reporter on this one. Datelined in Miami. Before the Reverend Rodney Howard Brown, the pastor of a Pentecostal megachurch in Florida, held 2 church services on Sunday. 2. Wow, each filled with hundreds of parishioners, and I would have thought thousands if you're going to qualify as a proper megachurch. Lawyers from the sheriff's office and local government pleaded with him to reconsider, putting his congregation in danger of contracting the coronavirus. The pastor ignored them, proceeding with the services at the River at Tampa Bay Church. The river at the bay. There's usually rivers emptying into a bay, true. But all right, that's enough water. References, I think. The River at Tampa Bay Church. And providing bus transportation even for members who needed a ride. On Monday, Sheriff Chad Cronister, is that right, of Hillsborough County, said he had obtained an arrest warrant for Mr. Howard Brown. He's just a Mr. now. Pastor falls away in New York Times style. For intentionally and repeatedly defying emergency orders mandating that people maintain social distance and stay at home. His reckless disregard for human life put hundreds of people in his congregation at risk and thousands of residents who may interact with them this week in danger, Sheriff Cronister, who is a Republican, said at a news conference in Tampa. Our goal here is not to stop anyone from worshiping, but the safety and well-being of our community must always come first. Mr. Howard Brown, 58, by the way, who lives in Hernando County, arrested in a different county. He had crossed county lines for what he thought were moral purposes, but I guess they weren't. He turned himself in on Monday afternoon, so they didn't have to go collect him. That's nice. He was booked in jail and freed 40 minutes later after posting a $500 bail, which I'm sure he collected very quickly. He faces 2 second-degree misdemeanor charges of unlawful assembly and violation of public health emergency rules. Florida is the second largest state in the country after Texas, with no statewide order requiring people to stay at home, leaving in place a hodgepodge of restrictions that have allowed many Floridians to maintain a semblance of normal life. Local authorities have frequently cited the lack of a state mandate as reason to urge, rather than require, residents to take precautions. The coronavirus poses a unique threat to the state with its large older population and millions of visitors. Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican as well, said on Monday that he would sign an order codifying local rules urging people to remain indoors, but only in southeast Florida, from Key West to Palm Beach, the most densely populated stretch of the state where many restrictions were already in place. The region accounts for about 60% of Florida's more than 5,700 coronavirus cases, Mr. DeSantis said. He's blamed some of the contagion, of course, on travelers from New York and Louisiana, and everywhere else in the world, fleeing hot zones there, and ordered those visitors to quarantine. Florida has closed restaurants except for takeout and delivery, urged people 65 or older to stay home, suspended vacation rentals, and taken other steps, but it has not ordered a statewide shutdown of non-essential businesses or beaches, which maybe, they ought to consider at some point. All right, well, that's the chief nugget in the story, of course, the arrest of the pastor. Just, I guess, the fact that they were willing to even do that and take that possible public relations hit. I mean, it's a minor thing. He's only being charged with misdemeanors. He was released quickly. The bail's low. All that's fine. Point's been made. I think I saw Josh Marshall of Talking Points Memo pointing out that our Reverend Rodney Howard Brown here was, to no one's surprise, among the pastors pictured of late in some of these Oval Office photo ops in which megachurch pastors come and lay hands on President Trump. So, one, sort of a weird and awkward moment all the time. Two, no surprise that it would be that kind of person violating the orders. And three, you touched Donald Trump and then poisoned your church. You're crazy, because I still maintain that he is a vector for this disease. And it's very difficult to escape that conclusion. Let's see. Also in the news, I noticed, with respect to the previous day's press conference outrage, in which Donald Trump accused New York City's doctors and other healthcare workers of stealing emergency supplies and walking them out the back door, allegedly to, I guess, sell them on the black market. He never, actually came out and said what he thought they were doing with them, but very strongly hinted that these things had been hijacked in some way, and I guess he probably thought they were profiteering on the market with the stolen goods, probably because, as is usually the case, he's profiteering on the black market from stolen goods. We'll get to that in a second. But I noticed here and grabbed the tweet of Michael McAuliffe, congressional reporter for the New York Daily News, who points out that Representative Frank Pallone of New Jersey, like Central Jersey area, longtime Democratic representative, brought up what Michael calls a disturbing mystery. Pallone said today, that'd be yesterday, we need a clear national leader in charge of supplies. He says there are cases where states order their own, which you remember Trump instructed them to do. We're not going to get it. You go get it, because we're not a postal clerk, the federal government. But Pallone's saying there really needs to be central coordination of this. And we've heard it's possibly because states end up bidding against one another. and it ends up driving up the price. And there's the real argument of the federal government having more buying power, being able to maybe negotiate better prices to buy in bulk, scales, economy of scale, right? And then distribute it to the states from there. But Trump, because he doesn't know how to do anything like that, despite his pleas to all of us to make great deals, etc., he doesn't know the levers of government. He doesn't know what he can do and what he can't do. And anyone who used to know in the federal government what they could and couldn't do had been fired long since. There's just nobody with that kind of knowledge. So he said, states, go get it on your own. So Pallone says, well, there are cases where states are ordering on their own, and then although they're able to successfully navigate the competition among the states and make a bid on emergency supplies, but then the supplies don't arrive. As he says here, there are cases where states order their own, quote, then it's intercepted on the way, and they don't know who it is who intercepted it or why. And that is an intriguing mystery, don't you think? Or a disturbing mystery, as Michael puts it. I'm going to have to search around to see if we can follow up and find out whether anybody wrote this up. But it along with the word that the governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, gave us that we shared yesterday, that she's hearing from vendors that vendors are being threatened by somebody somewhere with connection, I guess, to the White House or federal government of some sort, not to supply Michigan after, again, telling all the states to go and buy the stuff themselves. Not only is the competition bad, but vendors are being told there are certain states we don't want you to sell to. And then other states are able to acquire supplies and learn that they've been shipped only to find out that they mysteriously disappear in transit. Well, I don't know exactly how to put it, but I guess, usually I think these things are projection. Is there reason to believe that anybody connected with Trump is hijacking the shipments and doing exactly what he's accusing New York doctors of? Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Trying to find the tweet I was thinking of, but I did see a response to that. I didn't want to just leave you hanging with that question. There it is. Before the break, is there any reason to believe that somebody, whether directly or otherwise connected to the White House, Jared Kushner, somebody connected to him maybe, would be the ones waylaying these missing shipments? And ordinarily you would say no, but then every once in a while you might now say, well, gangster president, maybe. You know, if he finds out that there's a shipment of extraordinarily valuable medical equipment, medical supplies, headed somewhere that everybody else would kill to get their hands on, why wouldn't he want to get his hands on it and make some money turning it around? Is that crazy? I don't know. You tell me. I got a tweet here from Tony Gaddis, who you'll find on Twitter, and as we now can tell you, you may find also on Daily Kos, right? Because of the way his handle is configured on Twitter. Texas Dem, TexDem_DKos, if you want to find the Twitter handle. But he's got something to share on this. And he's got, he says to me, you may be onto something with my questions about whether or not this is all just projection here when Trump accuses the New York healthcare workers of stealing all the supplies. You may be onto something, maybe a link with the story below. And he includes one of his own previous tweets here. Let's read it. Republican fundraiser looks to cash in on coronavirus, according to a Politico story here. And we don't mean a fundraiser like donate now and win a chance at an N95 mask, although pretty close, and maybe that's what ends up happening to these things in the end. But the Politico story runs this way. Again, headline, Republican fundraiser looks to cash in on coronavirus. And we're talking here about a person who works as a fundraiser for Republicans. A longtime campaign operative informed clients that he was leaving politics behind for a new line of work. And that line of work is selling critical medical supplies, which is really not supposed to be a new line of work. It's supposed to be either a volunteer effort or an effort underwritten by local, state, federal governments, etc. Being a middleman in medical equipment for profit is not recommended if you want to survive the Torch and Pitchfork Brigade. And if you are a member of the Torch and Pitchfork Brigade, you might want to know who's doing this. Well, Theodoric Meyer and Alex Eisenstadt are going to tell you. They work for Politico. A longtime Republican fundraiser sent an email to his clients on Thursday, abruptly announcing that he would no longer be working for them. The reason? He saw an opportunity to capitalize on the coronavirus response. I would not admit that. You might just say, I can't work anymore, and reasons, and then just disappear. Why he would say this, I don't know. Unless, of course, he thought that perhaps among the ranks of his clientele, he might find willing buyers for his black market goods. Over the last 14 days, he says, I've built another business outside politics and will be focusing my full attention there, he wrote in the email, which was obtained by Politico. The fundraiser, are you ready? Have you got a pitchfork? Mike Gula, G-U-L-A. I don't know anything about him, but let's read on. The fundraiser, Mike Gula, didn't specify his new line of work in the email. That's wise. Okay. I wouldn't either. But in an interview, which I wouldn't have given, he said he'd started a new company selling medical equipment that's been in short supply during the coronavirus pandemic. The company, Blue Flame Medical, LLC, you tell me what that might mean, I don't know, was formed Monday in Delaware, according to state records. Its website says it sells coronavirus testing kits, N95 respirator masks, a wide selection, quote unquote, a wide selection of personal protective equipment and other, quote, hard to find medical supplies to beat the outbreak, unquote. Now, asked how he'd managed to procure such equipment when there are shortages in hospitals across the country, Gula said, I have relationships with a lot of people. Now, so do people who work in hospitals. And there are plenty of people who work in hospitals who don't have relationships with a lot of people but would like to begin such relationships. And it would be interesting to find out who are the people he has relationships with that are shipping N95 respirator masks, coronavirus testing kits, and other PPE to Mike Gula and Blue Flame Medical LLC in Delaware, as opposed to sending it to New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New Orleans, what have you. Gula started Blue Flame with John Thomas, supposedly a real name, a consultant who until recently worked as chief strategist for Don Sedgwick, a Republican who ran against Representative Katie Porter in California, but lost in the primary earlier this month. Gula's firm raised money for Sedgwick, according to campaign finance records. So he did find from among his clientele some interested parties, but only one named so far was interested in getting a cut of the profits as opposed to acquiring the equipment. The abrupt move to shutter Gula's firm has set the Republican operative world ablaze, and the larger community as well, I might add, with many in the business wondering about Gula's intentions and how he was able to move so swiftly. Thomas declined to specify how he and Gula had managed to obtain masks that have become so rare that some hospitals have resorted to reusing them, or having healthcare workers tie bandanas or scarves around their faces. It's just relationship-based, he said. I can't say anything else. I could say it. Hijacking trucks that are on their way to central New Jersey, for instance. He also declined to reveal how much money the pair had made, but said they were not price gouging. Sure, we are incredibly sensitive to gouging, he said. But they are. The new company may draw scrutiny as the Trump administration has moved to crack down on the hoarding of critical medical supplies and the sale of supplies at above fair market value. President Donald Trump issued an executive order on Monday designed to combat price gouging, and Attorney General William Barr told reporters this week that the Justice Department has set up a task force to stop people from, quote, manipulating the market and ultimately deriving windfall profits, unquote. As usual, take with a grain of salt, and it should have been reported. President Trump purportedly issued an executive order. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I didn't look. I'm sure it's out there. Is it binding? Is it real? Did he sign it? Did he write it? Does anybody know what's in it? Did they finish it? Was it really something he was just thinking of issuing and didn't? Did he get trapped in there and walk into a broom closet? No one knows. And, of course, Attorney General William Barr purported to reporters this week that the Justice Department has set up a task force to stop people from manipulating the market and ultimately deriving windfall profits. But I haven't seen them, and I don't know where they meet, and they might not because they're all socially distancing, and maybe it's a real effort, maybe it isn't, or maybe they're only hunting for Democrats who are price gouging, or maybe the people that they catch price gouging will be told that major donations to the Trump campaign will get them off the hook. I don't know. We don't know. We'll never find out. It's just one of those things we'll just have to live with, like they do in Ukraine. In an interview, Thomas said Blue Flame had already sold medical supplies to authorities in Georgia and other states. Police departments are, quote, almost begging for supplies, he said. That sounds very Trumpian. I'd have questions about his connections there. And also, not that Georgia doesn't deserve medical supplies, but I guess the big question underlying this is, what do you make of people who are Republican Party operatives one day and in the business of reselling medical supplies the next day? Not just that they're profiteering, but now my question is, are they directing their supplies at lower than gouging prices to red states or Republican operatives in charge of procurement in various locations and away from Democratic states? I don't know. Again, I don't have any idea. Ordinarily, something that would be totally irresponsible to float about any normal administration, but absolutely on par with what's going on with this administration, and you shouldn't worry about holding back. I don't want to overstate, Thomas continues, but we probably represent the largest global supply chain for COVID-19 supplies right now. This is a company that started last week or something like that, right? Two nudniks from nowhere have apparently gotten a hold of the largest global supply chain for COVID-19 supplies. Unless, of course, it's just an out-and-out lie, puffery, the sort of thing that, again, Trump engages in all the time. We are getting ready to fill 100 million unit mask orders. Now, who needs 100 million, right? It's outrageous. It's ridiculous. There's a hospital in New York that said they need 300,000 masks. That's crazy. They're filling 100 million unit orders. But, whatever. The doctors in New York are the ones doing the stealing. Gula is a veteran fundraiser who's raised money for more than 24 lawmakers in this cycle alone. Maybe they can answer questions about him, including Senator Steve Daines of Montana. Do they have enough masks? Tim Scott of South Carolina, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Martha McSally of Arizona, and Kevin Kramer of North Dakota. What a gallery of nobodies for the most part. But, okay, as senators go, that's a pretty low-power group. But I'd be curious whether their states are doing better in procuring supplies. His note to the lawmakers he'd worked for was blunt, informing them that Thursday, quote, will be my last day working for you, unquote. I don't know what that does to the contracts, but okay. It arrived right before the end of the quarter, during what is typically a hectic time for fundraisers that's now quiet because nearly all events have been canceled. After this email, I will be unreachable, he wrote. I wish you the best of luck in politics and life. Wow, that is some kind of break. One person who received Gula's out-of-office email response shared it with Politico. Mike Gula no longer checks this email account. If you wish to get in touch with Mike, please contact him at his new email. It's blanked out here. And his new cell number, also blank. Yes, it's blank for a reason. Okay. Gula said he's not shutting down his firm quite as quickly as his email to lawmakers made it appear. I'm helping them, and I'm finishing out everything they need for this quarter, he said, which is quite contradictory. The lights are not turned off. He said he decided to trade in fundraising to sell medical supplies, quote, because nobody was doing it, because the president and vice president were asking people to help. They were asking people for donations, of course. Well, maybe they weren't, but they should have been. And this is not what they had in mind. And by the way, it's very interesting. I mean, I assume fundraising for Republicans is a pretty lucrative business. For him to shut it down on a day's notice and say, I'm done with politics. Not I'll be back after the COVID-19 pandemic, but I'm done with politics and I'm going into this other line of work. And remember, the president's expectation, and I would have gathered the Republican expectation up to this point, was, well, remember when, you know what? On Thursday when he shut his company down, wasn't it still the president's position that this might possibly all be over by Easter? Imagine cashing out of a business, an established business, as a Republican fundraiser for national Republican figures, and cashing it in for a company that will sell supplies that won't be necessary at inflated prices anyway after Easter. That is some business plan, you know. Unless, but also we're not price gouging. We're just planning to make as much money as we will ever need from here on in our lives between now and Easter, but without price gouging. There is something awfully fishy about this plan. And it might not just be that they're terrible business people. But there you go. But some spin he puts on it. He's very keenly aware of the spin he needs. Well, no one else is doing it, and the president and vice president asked people to help, so I'm going to do that. It was my patriotic duty to close my political fundraising business and open a business that should, by all rights, be out of the market, well, now, I guess, within a matter of months, even with the extended timeline. How long do you think there's a livable profit to be made reselling medical equipment like this? How long are we supposed to be in this crisis? Or maybe they know something we don't. I don't know. But I'd like to find out. Gula also has two other firms, so he's a serial entrepreneur, to put the best spin on it, right? Here are his other firms, Prime Advocacy, which organizes Washington fly-ins for industry groups, and that's not happening anymore. And AMP, which he started last month and gave up, I guess, to provide services for PACs. It doesn't say what sorts of services, but remember, his email to everybody else was he was leaving. Did he say he was leaving political fundraising or leaving politics in general? I don't know. No idea what's happening to the other firms. He said he started Blue Flame in part because he wanted to leave behind the pressures of political work. There you are. Except for industry groups and PACs, because they're not political, I guess. I just want to live a private life, he said. I want to get out of politics. Well, I would like to get him out of politics, too. I'll agree with him there. But that is an awfully fishy story, don't you think? I'd love to know what his connections are in the White House. He does have a lot of relationships. And that's if you look at it through like a mobbed up lens, where'd you get all your equipment? How is it that you're with the largest global supply chain for COVID-19 supplies? It's a company that you started last week. I got relationships. Yeah. Where did you get all these N95 masks? They're almost impossible to come by. Fell off the back of a truck in central New Jersey on its way to Frank Pallone's district. I mean, I don't know. I mean, hey, message me with the hashtag KITM if you think that's totally crazy and there's no way in hell that the president and his cohort are in on something quite that illegal and insane. let me know. And if you don't raise your hand, I'll assume nobody has anything to say on that one. Okay. There's a couple of other interesting stories circulating. Let's say, that one I want to save for discussion with Greg because it's doctorly. Oh, yes, by the way, I wanted to highlight a comment that I did receive on Twitter the other day when, I guess at his Sunday press conference, the president let everybody know that 200,000 dead Americans was a good job and you all ought to appreciate that and congratulate me. It hasn't been done yet, but I'm pretty sure we're going to hold the deaths down to, something in the neighborhood of 250,000 people. And you should be praising me for that. What was interesting, of course, it was accompanied by the warning that, well, it's better than 2.2 million, which is what he insisted yesterday. They just told me, I just learned in the last day or so that 2 million people could die in this epidemic if we do nothing. But, so that was pretty amazing. But a Twitter friend known only as That Guy, or in particular, if you're looking for him on Twitter, That Guy 3002, or 3002, depending on how you want to read that one. That Guy 3002, who's a frequent correspondent, and by the way, spends most of his time, in addition to making observations like this, posting, as he says, deep dives into Simpsons scripts, but in a way that, and I've never really gotten to the bottom of the full story behind it, but it seems plain, I guess he maybe actually was a writer for the show at some point, because the insights that he's got, or collects anyway, from these scripts have been pretty amazing. If you want to occupy some time during your isolation, I recommend the feed. But anyway, he points out here, by attaching a Business Insider clip here, titled, Trump argues that this goes way back. Let me give you his comment first. As he's saying, the thing is, 2 million people dying. Remember, that was the that's crazy. He was spurred to action. He was, as the media were dying to, no pun intended, were dying to portray him as having finally accepted reality at this Sunday conference, in which he said, I was told just today that 2 million people or more could die if we don't do things about this, but I'll hold it down to 200,000, and that's awesome. Well, okay, so I'm glad he's sort of accepted reality here, and that was semi-good news, except, he's incompetent to do anything with the news of reality. But, all right, what that guy was pointing out is 2 million people dying in the United States would be less than 1% of the population, which is terrific, because a while ago, the story was, well, if this thing just really spreads unchecked, we could lose 2%, or maybe just over 2% of the population. It wasn't that long ago that people were saying, well, we could lose 3 million plus, because the morbidity rate of COVID-19 was so high. You remember when there was the debate, when the president kept referring to it as just like the flu, and saying, the flu kills 60,000 people here. Who knew that? Nobody knew that people died from the flu. That whole shtick. That was based on the idea of a less than 1%, or closer to like 0.5%, in terms of the population of the country. But the people who contracted the flu, the morbidity rate was, something in the neighborhood. I don't know. Greg will know offhand, I'm sure. But that the morbidity rate was considerably less than 1%, whereas it was being found, we still didn't have hard data, but the apparent data coming in from around the world was that it was closer to a 2% mortality rate with coronavirus, which people then translated into, well, you get a 98% chance of living even if you get this, so not so bad sort of thing. But then people running the numbers, pointing out, well, 2% of if this thing is unchecked and there's no immunity to it and it's just going to spread to everybody, 2% of the population is 3.5 million people or more, right? I mean, we're 300 and something million people in the country, everybody gets it. 1% would be 3.5 million, right? 2% would be over 6 million. And that guy was pointing out that the 2 million that he's talking about on Sunday, 2 million people dying in the U.S. is less than 1%, which is actually what Trump told Hannity the rate would be 3 weeks ago. Remember when he had the story about, I have a hunch that we're going to find out that the mortality rate is much lower? And that was the Business Insider clip that guy attached to his tweet. Trump argues 3.4% death rate from coronavirus. That was what was being reported from around the world. And that was being colored by the fact that a lot of the coronavirus deaths were happening in Italy with its much older population. And of course, from China, which had its own comorbidities that went along with coronavirus. But it was being reported that this thing might cause a 3.4% death rate. Trump argued that that was false, citing a, quote, hunch in claiming it's far lower. So just wanted to take a look at this Business Insider thing and see if we can extract the best stuff from it. This was a March 4th article, so early on. Sarah Al-Arshani and Lauren Frias are the reporters on this one. And you know how Business Insider does it. They have bullet points up top, and maybe that's a quick way of running through the best highlights of the article. President Donald Trump has argued that the 3.4% coronavirus death rate is false, and I think it's turning out to be lower here in the United States and maybe worldwide because the virus is, I guess we're a little bit better prepared for it and maybe lowering the morbidity rate. Another call-out bullet point here starts with a quote. Well, I think the 3.4% is really a false number, Trump told the Fox News host Sean Hannity on Wednesday night. Now, this is just my hunch. It's not really a scientific guess, let's say. But based on a lot of conversations with a lot of people who do this, because a lot of people will have this and it's very mild. They'll get better very rapidly. They don't even see a doctor. This was back, I guess, in the days when we were talking about 15 and soon it'll be down to 0. Though I think that might have been in late February that he actually said that. So they might be right about the lower death rate. That's true. Wouldn't put too much in his hunch. But then again, based on conversations with a lot of people who do this, a lot of people having a conversation with Donald Trump about it who knew what they were talking about would actually mean that he had heard figures in the millions much, much earlier than Sunday or the day before his Sunday press conference. It's really absurd that he's sticking to the story that just in the last weekend or so he heard the real story from Tony Fauci. The 3.4% figure cited this week, that would have been early in March, by the World Health Organization is based on the latest official numbers for confirmed COVID-19 cases and deaths worldwide. It's an increase from about 2% previously. Experts have predicted that the death rate will fall in the longer term as more milder cases are diagnosed. That is, as we find out through testing that there are people who have had what felt and looked like the flu but wasn't, but they didn't know what it was, and it'll turn out that that's COVID-19 after all, but it wasn't so severe with you and you survived, so we got to plug your numbers in here. You didn't die, you don't go in this column, and then therefore the percentage rates, the morbidity rate falls. That's to be expected. But Trump cited a hunch on Wednesday, back in early March, claiming that the real rate might be a fraction of 1%. The U.S. at that point had 11 deaths. And where are we now, by the way, in terms of the numbers? We're over, I don't know, I'll see whether I can find the thing. Where's my bookmarks? I bookmarked, I thought, the coronavirus update. There it is, the World Meters info. Get this morning's numbers here. USA's, so over 3,000 dead versus the 11 that they were dealing with then, by the way. We should check in to see about the percentage of coronavirus cases residing here in the United States. By the way, the news from overnight, Italy passing 100,000 cases, Spain passing China, which has managed, truthfully or otherwise, to keep their total cases at 81,518. So for a week or so, they've been lingering in the 81,000s. Spain has passed them, passing 94,000. Italy, 101,000 and climbing. U.S., of course, 164,000 and climbing. But, back to the Business Insider's article. The U.S. has had 11 deaths at that time, 10 in Washington State and 1 in California, with 150 more reported cases. But do you get the point we're driving in here? I feel like I lost it along the way with all the detail, was that back in early March, Trump was saying that the reported morbidity rate was much too high and might in fact be a fraction of 1%, which would still get us to 2 million dead. He just didn't do the math, possibly. Well, it's not 3.4, but I think it'll be a fraction of 1%. And now, of course, in combination or laid side by side with what he had to say in his Sunday press conference, which the press, noted some craziness with, but decided was his return to reality, he's saying what actually motivated him to action was the awful specter of what turns out to be a fraction of 1% being the morbidity rate in the United States. No, my gosh, that's totally unacceptable. I have to do something about it. Because back in the beginning of March, that was a good outcome, and you were going to show all the scientists who didn't know anything about this. We only have 11. It's going to be 15, and now it's 15, and it's going to be 0 soon, and like a miracle, it'll all go away. So he's been, you don't have to hear it from me that he's been wrong all along. But I think my biggest takeaway from all of this is that he's been wrong all along, but has had to have known he was wrong all along, and it doesn't matter to him, just as he was saying, I knew it was a pandemic. I knew it was a pandemic before they said it was a pandemic. And now he's just saying, I heard just yesterday 2 million people could die. You were hoping for 2 million dead and saying that would have been a good job at the beginning of March when we only had 11 cases. Amazing. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. So I was just figuring some numbers during the break, just to to wrap this thing up, just in case this hasn't been clear, right? We have what is the current population of the United States? I mean, as I recall off the top of my head, we're talking about 350 million or something like that. But what's the actual current number? I thought I'd go and take a look. 327. Okay, so 327.2 million in 2018 is the number that pops up in the box at the top of a Google search. What's the elevation of the United States? Does it say? Right, yeah, it's got varied elevation. I'm going to have to... All right, anyway, the point is, we're talking about 327 million people. So 327 million. And they were originally saying that they thought this thing, because it was a novel coronavirus and nobody had any resistance to it, that, nearly the whole population would get it. But I think they were saying something like 75% of the population of various countries could contract this. So if we say 70% of the population gets it, that's 22,890,000. Is that right? Wait a second. Let's take a look at that again. 327 million times, let's say, 70%. Okay. I think I put in 0.07. 228,900,000 people would get it. But again, the morbidity rate, he was completely wrong. He said it would be a fraction of 1%. So what kind of fraction should we use for that? Half? Half a percent? Because I believe of the 228,900,000 people got it. We didn't be multiplying it by 0.005, I guess. Is that right? So then we're talking about a half a percent, not 3.4% morbidity, but 0.5% morbidity is 1,144,500 deaths. Sean, I have a hunch that this is all baloney. the World Health Organization. It's a UN thing. Nobody believes it. Nobody trusts it. They say it's 3.4% morbidity. But I have a hunch. It could be a lot less than that. It could be 1%. Could be a lot less. Could be a fraction of 1%. And if we keep going with that thought, could be 0.5%. 3.4%. You could be off by 3%. It's only 0.5%. Okay. And if there's no resistance to the virus and it spreads throughout the United States and we just let everybody have it like at chicken pox parties and we adopt what the UK said they were going to do, or as you said on Sunday, last Sunday, we thought about it. We could have just ride it out like a cowboy. I'm not sure how a cowboy would do this, but a cowboy would just ride it out. That would be 1 million dead if it was a fraction of 1%. If it's 1%, of course, what's 0.5% gets us 1.1 million. What does a full percent get us? 2.2 million. Wow, where did that number come up recently? I just heard it the other day. On March 7th, they're reporting that the week before, so, March 1st, something like that, he's talking to Sean Hannity on TV and says, I have a hunch that they're completely wrong. They're so far off. It could be a fraction of 1%, which means he was already considering, except he didn't do the math, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's already considering deaths in the millions. A full month goes by with everybody telling him 2 million people could die. More. And then, I just heard just the other day, 2 million people. That's unacceptable. We're going to have to keep that. If I do a really great job and make some great deals with the virus, 200,000 would die. Just 10% of what they're talking about, which would be fantastic, I guess, as compared to 2 million. But I don't know. It's the idea that he just heard and was just spurred to action is what's bothering me. We all know it's a lie. But, yesterday, the main theme, I thought, of the response by the media to his Sunday press conference was, well, at least he gets it now. I don't think so. I don't think that's actually happening. I don't know. All right, let me see. I guess maybe related somewhat to this. Why is David Farenthold tweeting this now? I'm not certain. Oh, okay. It was yesterday being retweeted by others. When Donald Trump was promising COVID would go away like a miracle, the U.S. government squandered its best chance to stop the disease. Here's how. So, okay. I think we actually know what's involved in this. But the fact that the Washington Post was printing it is of some consequence. 11 to 100,000. What went wrong with the coronavirus testing in the U.S.? Asked Meg Kelly, Sarah Kalin, and Elise Samuels. Interesting. And, of course, rattling off his early quotes in this stuff. So I guess January 22nd, just to give myself the timeline again, is when he said, we have it totally under control. February 10th, we're in great shape in our country. We have 11, and the 11 are getting better. February 25th was, you may ask about the coronavirus, which is very well under control in our country. February 27th, disappear one day like a miracle, right? March 6th, of course, anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're here, they have the tests, and the tests are beautiful. Unbelievable statement. And so what went wrong? Okay, well, there's a huge story behind that, I'm sure. I don't know if I'm even going to bother reading through the story, although it makes good background reading, so I'll refer all of you to it in the roundup, and we can find out exactly what it was mechanically and logistically that kept us from producing enough tests to catch up to people that led to yesterday's confrontation about what per capita meant and how many people were in Seoul, Korea. It's just amazing how long he's spent in the dark about this, I guess. All right, some other things I wanted to share with you. Maybe I can share one of the non-political stories perhaps later. It might be something worth discussing with Joan, depending on where she's driving to today with her own stories. But I thought I'd share you this one. Came to me actually via email. The American Bar Association. Here's your political mechanics check-in for the day. A legal fact check press release of sorts that they did on pandemic authority. as we were talking about Ron DeSantis and his, in some way, codifying or authorizing the local authorities who have placed stricter limits on people's movements during the coronavirus pandemic in southwestern Florida, other states that have had closure orders, other states that have reversed the local closure orders as they have in Mississippi. The question the ABA had is, in the case of a pandemic, who actually has authority to do things like this, and why do we say they've got it? That seemed like an interesting subject to dive into, and here's their answer. As COVID-19 continues its assault on the country, residents in more than half the states have been ordered to stay home, and businesses, including restaurants, health clubs, and entire malls, have been closed as governors nationwide take extraordinary steps in an effort to protect public health. Under what legal authority do such orders fall? And are there legal limits on government actions during a health emergency? It's a good question. Probably should be examining the role of the president and letting the president know what it is at some point. But here's what we've got. Never have state and federal powers been tested to the extent that we are seeing today. True. The federal government's power is limited to certain circumstances. Through the Commerce Clause, which gives Congress exclusive authority to regulate interstate and foreign commerce, the federal government has broad authority to quarantine and impose other health measures to prevent the spread of diseases from foreign countries, as well as between states, although that has never been affirmed by the courts. Also, the Federal Public Health Service Act authorizes the Secretary of Health and Human Services to lead federal public health and medical responses related to public health emergencies. Of course, we don't trust our current Secretary of Health and Human Services, so that's of no particular help. But okay, under the U.S. Constitution's 10th Amendment, used to be the favorite among Republicans, and the U.S. Supreme Court decisions over nearly 200 years, state governments have the primary authority to control the spread of dangerous diseases within their jurisdictions. The 10th Amendment, which gives states all powers not specifically given to the federal government, allows them the authority to take public health emergency actions, such as setting quarantines and business restrictions. This despite, of course, Trump's floating of, well, I'm going to quarantine New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Maybe that's why he had to back off of it. They might have said, oh, remember, we love the 10th Amendment, states' rights, etc., etc. With states adopting emergency measures, there are several broad public health tools that governors can invoke. They can, for example, order quarantines to separate and restrict the movement of people who are exposed to a contagious disease if they become sick. They can also direct that those who are sick with a quarantinable, communicable disease, wow, try that 10 times fast, be isolated from people who are not sick. And, as a growing number of governors have done in recent days, states can order residents to stay at home with exceptions for essential work, food, or other needs. And by the way, pretty soon, I've seen so many complaints on Twitter, they're going to need to open barber shops and hair salons to meet that as a critical need, as people become more and more distraught at having to video conference with their coworkers without having had a haircut in a month. The governor's orders, akin to shelter-in-place directives, affect tens of millions in the affected states. Curfews are another tool they can impose. As outlined by the National Conference of State Legislatures, emergency health laws vary by state. When a 53-year-old Kentucky man who tested positive for COVID-19 refused to self-isolate, for example, state officials there obtained a court order to force him to isolate himself. They also posted a law enforcement officer outside the man's home. That's a problem. I was just reading yesterday about teenage kids who refuse to stay home during these stay-at-home orders and what the parents are having to deal with and all of that, including some kids right here in our own area. Most of the kids were all being interviewed, the parents interviewed in the Washington, D.C. area, but I imagine it's a problem everywhere. Very interesting. The power to quarantine and take even more stringent measures in the name of public health has belonged largely to the states for nearly 200 years. In 1824, the Supreme Court drew a clear line in Gibbons v. Ogden between the state and federal governments when it came to regulating activities within and between states. In a unanimous ruling, then Chief Justice John Marshall, so you're going back a ways, cited the 10th Amendment in saying that police powers are largely reserved to states for activities within their borders. These police powers, he explained, include the ability to impose isolation and quarantine conditions. Marshall wrote that quarantine laws form a portion of that immense mass of legislation which embraces everything within a territory of a state not surrendered to the general government. That would be the federal government, of course. In 1902, the Supreme Court directly addressed the state's power to quarantine an entire geographical area. In Compagnie Française de Navigation à Vapeur, that's my best French, obviously navigation, not a French pronunciation, but this crazy company versus the Louisiana State Board of Health. That explains the French, I guess. The justices upheld a Louisiana Supreme Court decision that the state could enact and enforce quarantine laws unless Congress had decided to preempt them. Thus, Louisiana could exclude healthy persons from an infested area populated with persons with a contagious or infectious disease, in this case, the Port of New Orleans, and that this power applied as well to persons seeking to enter the infected place. Of course, whether or not, there we are. It applied as well to persons seeking to enter the infected place, whether or not they came from within the state or not. In other words, can you ban people from entering an area that's infected with disease, even if that person is not a resident of Louisiana? And they decided here, the decision in this case, by the way, remains unchanged. And numerous courts have cited it as authority for state quarantines as recently as the Ebola outbreak. We haven't had any cases make it up to the Supreme Court, obviously, about COVID-19 just yet. While President Donald Trump has played down the need for the federal government to declare national quarantines or isolations, some interpret that he has that power under the Commerce Clause, which governs commerce with foreign nations and among the states. The federal government did not invoke the Commerce Clause during the global 1918 to 1919 Spanish influenza pandemic, which killed an estimated 40 million worldwide, including 675,000 Americans. The president could urge other governors across the United States to issue stay-home orders, following the lead of California and New York, which were the first states to issue such directives. But as a Congressional Research Service report explained in 2014, that's always worth reading, I might have to make note of that, amid the Ebola threat, governors have broad powers to invoke restrictions in their state, while the power of the president is significantly more limited by law and Supreme Court precedent. The president, for instance, said on March 17th that he discussed, quote, a national lockdown with advisors to minimize the spread of COVID-19. March 17th is actually some time ago. But 3 days later, he dismissed the idea. While some say a centralized federal response would be more effective and needed, and any executive order to that effect would be unprecedented and would likely lead to a court challenge or on constitutional grounds. So that tells us a little something about what he may or may not be being advised about these things. Whether or not it's sinking in, I have no idea. Let me just check out this Congressional Research Service piece here. The title of this piece from October 9th, 2014, Federal and State Quarantine and Isolation Authority. Looking at about a 14-pager here. So that would be some offline reading for those of you interested in boning up on this stuff while you have the rest of your day at your disposal. Okay. Let's see. Quite a few other interesting notes here that I might need to share with you. Oh, yes, something I didn't get to mention yesterday. and probably should have, so that you might have participated in such a thing. But we should take some time to acknowledge that there was an Instacart workers strike on. It was on for yesterday. I don't want to say it was on yesterday, meaning like you've misstated or misused the phrase that it happened yesterday or it whatever on yesterday. Anyway, I should check and see. I'm sure that I had a difficult time keeping up with the Daily Coast front page coverage of everything in the last couple of days, as I've been reading so many other sources here. But now I want to see whether we did a Instacart strike coverage or not on the front page yesterday. Or if not, maybe I can borrow a diary about the subject. There we are. I figured Laura Clausen, being our chief labor correspondent, if you will, has, of course, given the update on it. Let's see. Instacart gig workers plan strike over coronavirus working conditions. That would have been from the end of last week. And is this... Yeah, well, this one was, this one is, I have from TPM, was from Monday. So I don't know. Now, I guess when it comes to hard news reports of whether or not they actually struck, I better check. Maybe I can get a better and more up-to-date accounting of what actually took place yesterday. There we are. Good. Okay. Shall we take New York Times, CNN, or Washington Post? What do you think? Well, the Washington Post was 11 hours ago as opposed to 13 and 14 hours ago. So we'll call that the most up-to-date and grab their reporting on it. Workers protest at Instacart, Amazon, and Whole Foods for health protections and hazard pay. Important to note, especially if you are thinking of making use of these services to supply yourself. You should do so with this caution in mind. Grocery store, delivery, and warehouse workers have unprecedented leverage at this point to demand better working conditions during the coronavirus pandemic because their labor has become essential for millions of Americans. This piece is illustrated with a photo of a worker making such a protest, and I would point out wearing his mask probably improperly. That's the least of his problems, I guess, but I would just simply for his own sake say, make sure that you have both of those straps on. And it would probably be wise, as we were advised early on in all of this, and as Greg passed on, facial hair makes it very difficult for such a mask to remain effective. Anyway, Natasha Tiku and Jay Green reporting yesterday for the Washington Post, millions of consumers are turning to Instacart, Amazon, and Whole Foods, really, as essential resources during the novel coronavirus pandemic, something that has given workers at those companies unprecedented leverage. Oh, I see. I think Whole Foods, because Whole Foods is like an Amazon ordering pickup hub of some kind, if I recall correctly, from having been in a Whole Foods store, I don't know, well, now going on about a month ago. Now they are conducting walkout strikes and sick-outs, and you can't blame them for that one, to demand hazard pay and safety protections that match what they say is the high risk that they take in showing up to work. On Monday, some workers for grocery delivery app Instacart began a nationwide strike to demand hazard pay of $5 per order and better health protections. Meanwhile, some warehouse employees at an Amazon facility in Staten Island, New York, walked out because they said the e-commerce giant isn't doing enough to protect them. And really, honestly, the owner could pay for it out of his pocket, but I guess you won't necessarily see that stated, although I'm sure they could quote some of the striking workers saying it, even though this is the Washington Post. Maybe that was a bad choice to pick the Washington Post to report on the conditions being complained of at Amazon. But on the other hand, maybe it's a good choice, and we'll find out that the reporters are reporting exactly as they should or might elsewhere, which would be a good thing. On Tuesday, some staff at Amazon-owned Whole Foods, and that explains the deal between them, at Amazon-owned Whole Foods around the country plan to call in sick to demand the grocer offer hazard pay of double their current hourly wages along with other health protections. And it is noted, parenthetically here, Amazon chief executive Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. The workers' actions are taking place as many Americans find themselves largely stuck at home for weeks on end, thanks to stay-at-home orders issued by cities and states, making consumers more reliant than ever on deliveries. At the same time, the workers in those jobs have complained that the companies aren't taking enough precautions to protect them as they risk their lives to come into work and ensure customers get the products at home that they need. Spokespeople for Amazon, Whole Foods, and Instacart disputed the workers' claims, saying they are taking appropriate precautions to protect them. Both Democratic presidential candidates have shown support for the workers. On Saturday, Bernie Sanders of Vermont, of course, encouraged Instacart to meet workers' demands. Instacart, or as he would say, Instacart, was last valued at nearly, because he has to say the word billion and everything he says, it was valued at nearly $8 billion. Or $8 billion. A company of this size should not be forcing its workers to put themselves and us all at risk, Sanders tweeted. Entirely right. Instacart needs to step up and give their workers the protections and pay they need and deserve. Now, Joe Biden wrote on his Facebook page Sunday. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, much in the news these days. Perhaps we can discuss a little bit more about what she's up to later on. She also voiced support. First Instacart, then Amazon, now Whole Foods, although Amazon and Whole Foods have to go hand in hand. Workers are withholding their labor and demanding dignity, she tweeted Monday. When people work an hourly job, it's suggested in many ways that you're unimportant or expendable, except you aren't. Everyone deserves safe work, paid leave, and a living wage. Employees in at least 21 Amazon warehouse and shipping facilities across the United States have tested positive for COVID-19, the disease caused by the coronavirus, according to Amazon and local media reports. It's unclear whether the Staten Island workers' actions Monday had any impact on company operations. Amazon's warehouse workers have asked the company to offer paid time off for those who feel sick or need to self-quarantine, as well as to temporarily close warehouses for cleaning where workers tested positive. One sign at Monday's protest read, "Alexa, please shut down and sanitize the building," referring to the company's digital assistant. That's pretty funny. Is that the sign that was up at the front? No. So that person may or may not have been wearing their mask correctly. I don't know. About 50 workers walked out on Monday, according to Chris Smalls, a worker at the warehouse who helped organize the action. Amazon, which is trying to hire 100,000 workers to address the crush of coronavirus-related orders, disputed that figure, as well as the complaints that it's not doing enough to protect workers. Only 15 employees participated in the demonstration out of 5,000 who work at the warehouse. That's okay. People need that work, but I wish those numbers were better. That, according to, maybe it's a lie, because that's a number according to the Amazon spokeswoman, Lisa Lewandowski, not Lewandowski, but Lewandowski, who replied in an emailed statement. At the end of the workday, Amazon fired Smalls, which is something you can do if you only have 15 people show for your protest, I guess. He's a process assistant who worked for the company for 5 years. A manager at the warehouse told Smalls he had been terminated for violating a quarantine, Smalls said, since he had been in contact with a coworker who tested positive for the virus. Until Monday afternoon, though, Amazon hadn't warned him about not showing up to work, he said. They are trying to silence me for speaking up on behalf of the people, Smalls said Monday afternoon. It's retaliation. Certainly does sound like it, doesn't it? Amazon's Lewandowski said the company asked Smalls to stay home with pay because of his contact with the worker who tested positive, and his decision to come to the warehouse put others at risk. This is unacceptable, and we have terminated his employment as a result of these multiple safety issues, Lewandowski said. Late Monday, New York Attorney General Letitia James called the firing disgraceful, asked the National Labor Relations Board to investigate the incident, and said she is considering all legal options. Earlier Monday, Lewandowski said Amazon is increasing the facility's cleaning, encouraging safe distancing among its staff, and checking employees' temperatures as they arrive to keep workers safe. I don't know whether that's sufficient to the task, but that's what they say they're doing. Like all businesses grappling with the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, we are working hard to keep employees safe while serving communities and the most vulnerable, Lewandowski said. Instacart workers held their strike in part because they say the company has failed to provide hand sanitizer, masks, or disinfectant during the outbreak. That seems important, don't you think? On Sunday, Instacart announced that it used a third-party vendor to manufacture hand sanitizer and would begin allowing workers to order it online Monday. Thanks. And start shipping next week. So workers, you can pay for your own hand sanitizer. That is a very generous offer, Instacart. Thank you so much. All right, we'll be back in 2 minutes. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We'll continue with reading about the strike, and there's actually some more interesting resources that we might turn to in all of this. But let's see. Where do we open this up? Okay. Yes, we were reading the Washington Post's reporting about this. And the generous offer of Instacart to allow its workers to order the hand sanitizer that they were contracting to have made online and start shipping next week. But in the meantime, either don't worry about it or whatever. But okay, not much of an answer. And by the way, also at issue, workers had asked that Instacart raise the default tip setting in the app to 10%, up from 5% or less. And that might be a good idea, given how critical their work is and how much risk is involved, and how you'll want, of course, you'll want them to be able to afford to buy hand sanitizer when it's made available to them online for purchase next week. So tipping, a good idea. And of course, the standard tip that we learned about, when you go with the restaurant tip, 15% is outdated, and a lot of people are now saying that 20% is more in line outside of the coronavirus pandemic context at a restaurant. So here, the default setting in the app is going to be very influential. People will just say, oh, okay, I guess that's the recommended tip. How much do you tip an Instacart shopper? And the answer is what the default is, 5%. That ain't much. And going up to 10% doesn't bring you anywhere near what restaurant workers would be getting. Although restaurant workers do perform a different job and different task, to be sure. 10% doesn't seem like such a huge ask. Instacart instead is changing the default setting, though, to the customer's last tip amounts. Unclear, I don't have any data on it. Maybe they do. Unclear whether or not that is an effective increase or not. The strike organizers said Instacart's last-minute response was too little too late and went forward with the strike. And it links here to a Medium article that is written under the byline of Gig Workers Collective. So perhaps we'll check in with them to see what they have to say about the strike. In a statement, Instacart spokesperson Natalia Montalvo. And here comes Joan. How come this is not coming up, not giving me my notice on, here we are, Skype. Thank you very much. Okay, good morning, Joan. I was having difficulty getting my computer, the computer that matters, to acknowledge that Skype was getting an incoming call. All the other computers that don't control it were very clear on it. But
how many computers do you use to produce the show, Kagro?
311.
Wow.
This is amazing. I've got 3 running. 1 that actually handles the show, and 2 that handle the load of everything else, so that the one that's running the show doesn't bog down, and I'll be able to answer Skype calls. But you can see how well that's working.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Are you healthy? Is it
We're
working?
mostly healthy.
Okay.
Mostly healthy.
That's good. We now have to kind of check in and just say, well, where is the virus getting around to? We're doing okay here. We don't have anybody sick in the house at the moment, but, we're always having to wait 2 weeks to know whether
Right.
it's really true.
You have contact with somebody and you wait the 2 weeks, and then you have to go out and go to the pharmacy and reset the clock. And yeah.
Right. So we're constantly, keeping an eye on that. But otherwise, so far so good, and we hope it stays that way. I was just discussing the Instacart workers' strike, or what I could gather from it, but just letting everybody know that, as we're all kind of stuck inside, and it seemed like Instacart or Amazon would be our lifeline. You kind of have to be aware of what you're dealing with. I can't tell you not to use them, especially if it's your only lifeline. Everybody needs to kind of know back of their minds what's going on. And so, the best we can do at this point is say, all right, if I'm forced to use Instacart, maybe I should up my tip, if nothing else. So good information.
Definitely up your tip. They're saying,
I've never
anecdotally, I've seen this on Twitter, delivery workers saying they're not getting tips, that people, because they use the leave at the door option, where they don't actually have to see them face to face.
Yeah.
And the tipping is added then on the app, that they're not getting tips.
Yeah.
People somehow just think that the stuff's appearing magically at the door and they don't have to help anybody out who's bringing it to them.
Yeah.
It's very strange. So don't be that person.
Yes. I know a lot of people are holding on to their cash.
You, of course, would not be the person.
Right. Well, we hope not. And but I can also appreciate that there are people who say, I don't know when my next paycheck is coming, and I don't know if I want to give out that money in tips. But if you do know that you want somebody else to run the risk of doing your shopping, keep it in mind. I understand that there are going to be people that have this problem.
Yeah.
If you're shopping by Instacart, the chances are that you could spare a little. And so if you can't and you're insulted by it, I guess I'd be interested in your story. But for the rest of us, put in a little extra to make up for the people who are cash strapped and immune compromised and don't have any other way. So that's another good reason to up your tip.
Yes. Help out the other people.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's a hell of a situation we find ourselves in.
It certainly is.
What's going on with you?
It's not as surreal in some ways as it was a week ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get what you mean.
I guess because you're used to it.
Yeah.
But the uncertainty hovering over it all. I mean, we really have no clue when this ends, how it ends, how much the nation's changed.
Yeah.
But there are a few things that will never change, and we know that. And one of them I just wrote about, Mitch McConnell.
Ah, yes. Okay. Who's that? What's he doing? Yeah. Why today? What's the new twist?
He went on Hugh Hewitt this morning, which is where he goes to say his most awful stuff.
Oh, yeah, okay. That makes
and
sense.
He was, predictably awful. The reason why he wants you to know the federal government has been so bad and flat-footed in responding to coronavirus is because impeachment.
Okay. So he picked. I did see Byron York writing about this yesterday, or referring to someone else who had written. Yeah. So I mean, he has an explanation for why that's.
Yeah, because everybody was diverted. The attention was diverted.
Oh yes. Okay.
By impeachment.
Now that happened when
the week that they were considering impeachment was when all of the senators got the briefing from Trump health officials and Fauci about coronavirus.
Okay.
The one that caused 4 senators, 3 of them Republicans, to dump a couple $1 million worth of stocks.
Yes. Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah, but they didn't see it coming.
No, I see. They were distracted.
They were so distracted by impeachment that they just couldn't take in all of this information that they were getting from health officials about this potential pandemic.
I see. So they got enough to sell the stocks, but not enough to do anything about it for anybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact,
odd.
they were getting this information and they were blowing it off. Chuck Grassley blew it off. Mm-hmm. He says it doesn't appear to pose any imminent threat to Americans who have not recently traveled to the Hubei province of China. That's what he said on February 4th, the day before they voted to acquit Trump. Yeah. And after he had received more than one briefing about coronavirus. So, it seems like he was maybe not necessarily paying attention in these coronavirus briefings, but, he was getting them. He wasn't totally distracted by impeachment because he could talk about something else.
Yeah, that seems clear. I mean, it's not that it was unusual at that point in time to think, well, it might be more or less contained to the Hubei.
Except that in January we already had at least one case confirmed in the U.S. at this point.
That's true. And while you can expect, hey, I hope it doesn't spread like that here, like it did there, and we'll see what we can do about it. But there was no indication that the reason for his lack of concern was, well, I'm actually very worried about it spreading throughout the United States, but I have to go back to the impeachment trial. I didn't hear anybody say that.
No. And by the way, let me offload some stocks.
Yeah, right. I have, that's true, right? I'm so distracted by this. I just have to make this one phone call. Hold on. And I have to make several $1 million worth of trades.
These people.
Yeah. Particularly.
But back to McConnell being these people.
Sure. That is the person we're worried about. Yeah.
In the same breath as saying they were so distracted by impeachment, he said one person was getting it. And one person was the one who sort of tipped us all off. And that was Tom Cotton.
Oh, well, he's so smart.
Yeah. Tom Cotton, the one who has been floating the conspiracy theory that this was a biological weapon developed by the Chinese in a super secret, not so secret facility near the market in China where they think it started.
I see. So he got it. And he used that getting it to figure out that it was a bioweapon being launched first against themselves and then against the rest of the world.
Yes.
Right. So like a gun fail, but with a bioweapon.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Just
so he's very smart.
That's their big epidemiological brain in the Republican Senate. The guy who says this is all a biological weapon.
I see. Well, he's probably right.
He got there first.
Okay. Wow. So that's some kind of an amazing excuse to come up with. And I assume that most people outside of his circle are not, Republicans. Other than that, won't buy it. I mean, it just seems like ancient history for one thing at this point.
Yeah.
But the idea that in January they were distracted from responding. And, of course, Trump was watching TV the whole day. Now, he may have been distracted by impeachment about a number of things, I guess. But he didn't because that was obvious.
No excuse for the Senate. But
true.
And in the ongoing Republicans Are Going to Kill Us All series about how disconnected they are to the reality of just how bad this thing is. McConnell says that he doesn't think there's going to be any reason to do any more action on the part of Congress.
Oh, you mean no more relief action?
Right.
Or
they're
really
done.
Anything. Okay.
But he does want to come back and do judges.
Oh, well, okay. There is some chance that some of the judges will be sick, though, before this is all over. Well, okay. I mean, they are coming. Well, I don't know. I say it like, they are coming back because they usually
We don't know that they're coming back. We don't know anything. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
That's true. What? By the way, what's it like from the governor in Idaho? What sort of orders are you under, if any?
We're under a statewide stay-at-home order.
You are, okay.
We've got the strange situation of one of our rural counties, Blaine County, which happens to be where Sun Valley is, right now rivaling New York for cases per capita. We'll do the per capita thing.
Well, we don't know what that means, so that means nothing.
Right.
Okay.
So the level of problem in Sun Valley and in Blaine County is as bad as what New York City's getting right now.
Wow.
Because it's Sun Valley.
Yeah. I mean, is that New Yorkers who fled to their ski chalets?
A lot of people coming in from all over the country, and they haven't pinpointed who it was precisely, but there's just so much travel into that place.
Wow.
And in and around that place, and it's so.
It tends to love ski areas for some reason. This COVID-19.
Yeah.
And
Idaho not having, we didn't have what they had in, was it Telluride? I think it was Telluride, the little town there, where one of the wealthy denizens decided, hey, let's keep my town safe, and bought up a whole bunch of tests and got everybody tested and isolated the people who were sick, and they've avoided this. We weren't thinking ahead enough in Idaho. But anyway, yes, we have a stay-at-home order.
That is something. Well,
which ahead of a lot of states, which sort of shocked me, that our governor would be so forward-thinking. But not forward-thinking enough.
Oh, dear.
It's just so frustrating. To veto 2 bills that bar gender changes to birth certificates, and to not allow transgender girls to play sports in high school and college.
Okay, but those are bills that passed that so he didn't veto them. He wasn't paying attention.
He did not
to that.
veto them.
Okay,
he signed them. In fact, ahead of the pocket veto deadline, he signed them yesterday.
Okay.
One of them,
affirmative sport,
just so frustrating. The state passed the same law 2 years ago, and a federal court said, no, you can't do that. Struck the law down, and told Idaho not to do it again. Don't pass this measure again. So now we have done it again and are in contempt of court, and we'll have to spend money that could be spent in Port Blaine County trying to help fight coronavirus on these now 2 unconstitutional bigoted bills.
Which of the 2 were they warned about?
The first one they were warned about,
birth
a law
certificates.
barring gender changes on birth certificates.
Okay.
The other one's brand new. That the ban on transgender girls playing sports, which requires physical confirmation by a doctor, which you can imagine what that entails for,
Yeah. Well, I can imagine. I just can't imagine how they wrote this. I mean,
with everything going on right now, this is their priority.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the leftovers from earlier in the session, but well, I don't know. That one, I have no idea exactly what they're doing there. And of course, when you bring in the doctor, like, what is the doctor? I mean, I understand what you would, but what's the role the doctor's supposed to play here?
Conducting a physical examination to certify that this is indeed a girl.
I see.
So any random parent, any random mean girl, any random horrible person can say, that's not really a girl on your volleyball team.
And then have it. Oh, yeah. Well, that's certainly problematic, is the idea that you trigger this sort of thing with random accusations. That would
because Idaho.
But right?
On an up note, We're doing a vote by mail for our primary
That's
next
good.
month.
Oh, okay. So that's that. All right. I will take that as an up note. That's a very
I'm sorry,
wise
not
thing to do.
next month. It's not April quite
Oh,
yet, in May.
okay. Well, tomorrow it'll be next month.
Right.
Got it. Okay. That's a nice thing to see happen. I don't know why everyone else is lagging on this or insisting that it poses some enormous problem, or why we're not addressing it nationally, or any of those things.
Because that is, to quote Mitch McConnell,
I see. Yes.
an unrelated policy items that Democrats otherwise wouldn't be able to pass.
Okay. What about a $2 trillion relief bill? Would we otherwise be able to pass a $2 trillion price tag on anything other than perhaps defense spending? I mean,
I would
sort of the
seriously
mode
doubt
we're
it.
in here. But okay. Well, yeah, they're doing they're working overtime from isolation, I guess, coming up with excuses for not doing anything, and for not addressing the looming election, which here in Virginia, we've just had our orders are a little strange, and for some reason our Democratic governor has been less than aggressive, let's say, in issuing an outright stay-at-home order.
It's still county by county, isn't it, in Virginia?
I am not. You know what? I'm not 100% clear because it changed yesterday. However, he has been very aggressive in the timelines, but not. And most places have been complying voluntarily or issuing county orders about that amount to a stay-at-home order by closing everything that you would otherwise go out for. So for a while, the situation was, well, you're allowed to go out. There's just nowhere to go, which maybe was as effective as a stay-at-home order. I don't know. But making it a stay-at-home order gives people a different idea about what they should be doing.
Right.
But he's been more aggressive with the timeline. So we're now and I think we've now switched over to stay-at-home style order because the rest of the region finally did that too. But ours is like through June 10th now, which I think
is long,
yeah,
compared to most other places. Yeah.
So right, so I mean, he's a doctor, so it makes a certain amount of sense. Why he resisted so long stay-at-home order, I don't know, but yeah. So he's being very aggressive with the dates, and I mean, if other states follow suit, now you're talking about it really can't be any other primary voting other than doing it by mail, and if it gets extended any longer than that because of lagging states, then you're talking about possibly really putting the November elections in jeopardy of being too much of a mass event.
Yeah.
And yet no action at any point by national Democrats or Republicans, but certainly no acknowledgement by national Republicans that there might be some wisdom in looking ahead. Which I was so distracted I couldn't do anything, but the lesson I've learned from it is let me remain distracted and not do anything.
Right, let me think about judges.
Sure, right.
Which is considering that unless they're planning on canceling the election in November, kind of ridiculous of them.
Yes.
I just sent you a link to the brand new hot off the presses civics poll we released this morning.
Yeah.
Civics released, not we. I mean, yes, Daily Kos is the parent company of Civics, but anyway.
Yes, for legal purposes.
57% of the public says the U.S. government responded too slowly.
They're right.
To coronavirus. They are right. But we're still at this point where Republicans are not taking this seriously. At Civics, they're doing daily tracking on what's your level of concern about the outbreak. And it's just astounding looking at Republicans still in the middle of all of this. Only 35% are moderately concerned. 21% extremely concerned, 13% not concerned at all.
Yeah, I don't know why. I guess maybe it's where they live may or may not have been hard hit, but
41% of the rest of us are extremely concerned, and 32% moderately concerned, for a grand total of 73% concerned about this happening. That's, independents and Democrats.
That'd be a big issue normally.
And it's just total denial that this is a thing, that this is reality.
Yeah.
Because they watch Trump. And when you dig down in this poll, I sent you the link.
Okay, yeah.
Of course, we always divide things by whether or not you're a Fox viewer.
Oh,
the Fox
right.
viewers are definitely in denial about all of this.
Yeah, well, right, that's been their job up to now anyway. I'm confused about why. Well, I mean, I'm not confused about why that's the case. I guess I'm just still confused about why no action nationally, and just in terms of planning ahead. I know that Republicans are opposed politically to the idea that we should take these measures to protect the election. They have been all along, when the threat was, possibly Russia. Now that the threat is a virus, and which is I think still polls better than Russia as a real thing and a real threat among the public, even among Fox viewers. I would guess.
Yeah.
They think the virus is more real than Russian interference. But I mean, I don't know. And I guess they figure, well,
it's a strange mix, because 69% still support a national quarantine.
Okay.
So there are still Republicans who say, there should be a national quarantine, but at the same time can say they think Trump's doing a fine job. And this isn't something we need to be concerned about. I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance happening for folks.
Well, that's always been the case. It's just, when you really need to apply yourself to a serious problem, I guess cognitive dissonance is a hurdle.
Yeah, and it leads to another strange result that I'm not sure I entirely believe. Mm-hmm. I believe that our statistics are correct on that we got the data right on it. I don't believe what people are telling us. Okay. 94% say they are practicing social distancing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, that's not right. But you don't want to be the person who says they're not. Well, some people really
so there's
a
lot of social pressure to say, yes, I am distancing.
Well, that's good. There should be. But
you
should also be doing
that's filtered through to them. But I really have a hard time believing 94% of Americans are doing it.
Yeah,
if that were the case, we would see much lower contagions happening, I think.
I hope so. But I'm sure that everybody wants it to be over soon. They may just misunderstand. Well, what does that mean exactly? Social distancing.
Actually, Gavin Newsom was on the Daily Show last night.
Oh,
Trevor Noah's doing the Daily Show from his apartment.
Oh, okay.
And actually, I like it better. It's odd.
Okay, that's not a bad thing.
He's doing a really good job with it. He had Gavin Newsom on, and Newsom says it shouldn't be social distancing because that has the idea of social in it, and it gives people the wrong idea. It's got to be physical distancing.
Oh.
You've got to be physically separate from people.
Yes.
And I think that's a good distinction to make. I think it's an important thing.
I think that's true, too. Because a lot of people say, oh, well, I'm social distancing. I get together with all my friends and we sit 6 feet apart, which is, better than being close. But it would be even better if you
did it over Skype.
Not there together so that you didn't accidentally get closer than 6 feet, et cetera. It's another one of those things I was reading. Parents having trouble with their teenagers and staying home, and the teenagers saying, "Oh, we're practicing social distancing," and then sending their parents selfies of themselves. But they're, how do you get people in your selfie if you're 6 feet apart? Oh, I forgot. I'm sending you evidence of the fact that I'm ignoring what you said. Oops, That's kids for you. But full-grown adults are doing it too, I guess. So that's problematic.
But they say they're not.
Yeah. I think we just have a different idea of what social distancing is. Or I run into people that say, I'm social distancing and socially isolating myself. I'm only seeing one person at a time on a rotating basis day by day. Like, well, but if you see how long it takes to get sick, etc. But they'll tell you I'm social distancing. But, okay, well, they're not, and we encourage them to learn more about it, to which end we'll have Greg lecturing us about it tomorrow, some more. We're getting great information from him, and great information from all of you on the front page of Daily Coast. We've always been socially distanced, I guess.
We have.
Really, right?
We're trendsetters.
Yes. So just do it like we do it and share your news virtually, and it works as a community. No one would say we don't have one, right? So
we have a great one.
All right. Well, thanks for keeping us all up to date and bringing us the news, and even when it's terrible news about Mitch McConnell being awful and getting worse. But as long as you stay healthy, we can socially distance and share that news. I appreciate you coming in today and letting everybody
You are
know.
most welcome. Talk to you next week.
All right. Take care until then. See you next week. And we'll see the rest of you tomorrow. Greg Dworkin will come by and let us know what's up and give us the latest and lowdown on what to be doing and how to do it.
Daily Coast Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, let's check in here quickly on what's coming up next. Justice Putnam, of course, bringing us the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Anything jump out real interesting? Let's see. Yes, the comparison to Ukraine making top headlines with him as well. And much, much more, and some more interesting effects of the coronavirus isolation.